BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This podcast might contain strong language and adult content. Two of my favourite things. James Acaster here, comedian and music fan, and in 2017 I had a breakdown. I dealt with that breakdown by buying as much music from 2016 as I possibly could. As a result, I now own over 700 albums that came out in 2016, and I'm convinced it's the greatest year for music of all time. Over on the main podcast, James Acaster's Perfect Sounds, I have a guest on every week. I send them a different album from 2016 and we discuss that album. Now, lately I had Rosie Jones on, and we talked about the Radiohead album A Moon-Shaped Pool. Rosie and I discussed how we both had never really fully dove into Radiohead before. We were so intimidated by their vast back catalogue, how intricate and highly thought of every single album that they've done is, and we were always too scared to dive into the world of Radiohead, but we did with this album. We both loved it, and we've since both explored Radiohead much more. I haven't found a single weak track this band had done. I'm loving it, I'm having a wonderful journey, and I feel so lucky to have been able to do this bonus episode that we're bringing to you today. I got to sit down with Colin Greenwood, the bassist, multi-instrumentalist, one of the members of Radiohead. I got to go to... What? Do you know what? I'm going to say that I got to go to his place, because that's what happened. He's a very nice man, very sweet man, and he let us come round and record in his living room, sit down and discuss the album 5 years later.
That's what I'm learning at the moment. That's lovely. It's lovely, isn't it? Nice, yeah, such a nice sound.
When we arrived at Colin's place, he'd just been delivered a double bass by another man named Colin, which he then showed me how to play as well. I got us a little double bass lesson.
So it's all about, I just had a lesson, it's about showing as much flesh as possible to the string and get a really good attack. So
it was in this amazing open space, like loft. It's very echoey. You might hear some rain coming down on the windows during the interview. Absolutely torrential rain at one point.
It's pissing down with rain. James, can we just stop whilst I close another window?
Yeah, of course. You can close a window.
Okay.
There was a fly got involved at one point as well. There's a lot of ambient sound in this episode, which I think is very nice. Radiohead have been known to use ambient sound every now and again, so maybe that's quite fitting. We discussed many things throughout this conversation. We talk about the process of evolving tracks, music scenes, if they're a good or a bad thing, and Colin even recommends some Radiohead tracks that I should start with because I'm just delving in to the world of Radiohead, and I got to push him and find out if he thinks that 2016 is the greatest year for music of all time, because that's what this podcast is about. I believe that 2016 is the greatest year for music of all time, and I want everyone to agree with me, even if you're in Radiohead. Now, it's been 5 years since Radiohead released A Moon-Shaped Pool, so I thought I'd begin by asking Colin what it's like talking about an album in retrospect.
It is weird because I was thinking about it, and the weird thing as well is not just the record, but the fact that we took the record on tour in 2018. So, you know, with all the stuff that's happened with coronavirus and everything, it makes that whole passage of time between making the record, touring it, and then here we are in 2021, even longer and weirder.
Yeah, how do you feel about it now? Because I guess when an album comes out, everyone wants to ask questions about it. I know you guys don't do a lot of interviews as soon as an album comes out, but like 5 years later and looking back at the album, do you feel differently about it compared to when it came out or when you were recording it?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
I feel, when I was re-listening to it before we started talking, it's just such a sort of beautifully encapsulated thing, you know, it's sort of got its own sound world. Like I say, it's a sort of capsule of time before everything has happened subsequently. And also because, you know, as I said, it becomes a different thing when you play it, when you go on tour. So there are songs on the record that I really like, and then when we played them, they became something else on the stage. And they showed you a different style of music that we hadn't done before. That is kind of a challenge, but actually it's like, wow, you can do that too. And when you get to that, I don't know what number of record it is, whether it's 7 or 8 or on the records we've done. I just think that's like really great, because one of the things you want to do when you play with people is you want to show someone something that they haven't heard before, that they get into, And I guess that can get harder and harder, I don't know, when you play with the same bunch of people. So there's a couple of things on that record that have done that I think is great.
Also, because you were saying about playing the songs live and then they can like evolve and change in that respect. And then there were some songs on this album that you'd had for years and you'd been already playing live for a long time. So with those, had they already gone through loads of different phases and had changed a lot, and then you were able to capture them on the record as this like, do you see it as that's the finished version you get, or are all the songs always evolving constantly?
Yeah, well, both at the same time, which sounds like a sort of paradoxical, but that's what's great about like any kind of art form. It can be one thing and two opposing things at the same time. It can be something that is fixed, like a beautiful song written by Tom, say, or and then it changes all the time. And then, like, I listened to your really cool broadcast you did with Rosie Jones, and she talked about how she actually liked the first and the last songs on A Moon-Shaped Pool, and those are like two of the oldest songs. There's like Burn the Witch, which was always like a song we had that Tom had written this amazing chorus, and then we were all trying to work out the verse, and then my brother came up with this amazing stabbing staccato, violent strings. And then True Love Waits, which is this beautiful song that Tom had written a long time ago that we've sort of have played, or he's done in lots of different ways, you know. Whether it's an acoustic guitar on stage, like you said, the live version, or whether it's like using it with lots of loops and found sounds that Nigel did when we were making OK Computer. And then the one on the record is a sort of, I don't know what it is, it's like a sort of slight return to that, and then but it's a very beautiful song, so it doesn't, you know, really matter. As my brother might say, you know, you could play it on 2 teaspoons and a box of matches, you know, if you've got this amazing song, you know.
Yeah.
But I remembered what I was going to say, which was about the start of A Moon-Shaped Pool, which might be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nigel, our producer, was really into these, they're called stems, and they're like sort of audio files that are taken from recording sessions that are on a computer, because back in the olden days, people would make records on magnetic tape and record onto magnetic tape like 2 inches wide. On the internet now, you can get these, like anything, you get these stems of like individual tracks from famous recording sessions from like David Bowie. So you can get like the original like 5 or 6 tracks of A Space Oddity.
Wow.
So you can get all separated, like the acoustic guitar and the sax and the bass and the voice and stuff. Yeah. So Nigel was kind of inspired by that, and he thought, wouldn't it be great if we started a record where we took one of, because we had 2 24-track tape machines, where we broke it down and made it into like a more simpler, like a 16-track, because these records would have been made on 16, and instead of like using a computer, we'd like make the recordings in the old-fashioned way, like where you punch in onto the tape rather than like clicking on a mouse and recording into a computer.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started, when the recording.
And with stuff like that, when you're kind of starting from that point, I guess we talked about quite a bit on the podcast with different albums, but where you sort of limit yourself and put some boundaries in place, and that makes it. Does that help immediately? Like, is there something that gives you that makes the whole?
It gives it like an edge.
Yeah.
As well as it reduces the options, and you know, and it's an old skill that Nigel had from when he started apprenticing at Rack Studios in St John's Wood, like back in the day, when you had like people like Steve Lillywhite and people making records there like Al Green or Big Country, people like that, or New Order, and like, you know. So I think he probably wanted to do it for his own, you know, sick, twisted pleasure as well.
When you're recording like that, does it feel different? When you know that if you mess it up, you've got to go back and punch in again, and there's all that. And is it different to when you're doing it digitally or whatever? Does it feel different when you're recording your part? Is there a different vibe?
Yeah, well, it depends what instrument you're talking about. Because like with drums, it's a whole world of pain. Because there's all that stuff going off with the cymbals. You can't. I think it's much harder, and I've got so much respect for drumming because it's so much more. I've got the Easy Duffer's Guide, because with the bass guitar you punch that in really, well, I can't punch it in, but you know, it's really easy for me. So When we made the record, I just sat in front of the control desk with Nigel and just played a bit, and if he liked it, we'd keep that, and that's how it kind of happened, I think. But it's easy for me, and then I think it's tough for anyone who has to make more than one sound. So yeah. And we kept that process. Nigel kept that process when we were finishing the record in France. He would make these sort of rhythm tracks and loops and stuff out of a 24-track tape machine, and he's very hands-on. He's very artist. That's a terrible word. He's very loves all that stuff, and I think it's fantastic.
When you say about that different approach to recording from him. Is there anything else at the start of this album when you look back that was different to your previous projects, maybe musically or the way the songs are written, that really stands out and puts it separate to the other things that you'd done in the past?
I mean, for me, the thing that I love about the record as well is what my brother did.
Yeah.
So my brother wrote these beautiful string lines and parts and arrangements, and then towards the end of making the record, we went back to Rack Studios, which is where we did a record called The Bends and some other things, and with these amazing musicians. My brother was really, really into vocals, female choral vocals. So there were lots of it. So he wanted to put them on lots of the songs and stuff. And so we recorded lots of these beautiful choral sort of female vocals. It was beautiful, but we used some of that, and then the string parts and the arrangements that he wrote, which was just fantastic. So I'm just so full of awe and pride and gratitude for what he did.
Well, I read an interview with him where he said about how much he loves those days of recording the strings. Where would you be when the strings were you like?
I'd be making the tea and coffee, or wandering around with a camera trying to take some dodgy, blurry pictures, and then sitting in the control room just listening to. The whole process of recording string session is just so exciting, and it's such a sort of rich, life-affirming sound and a full spectrum of resonance and emotion and stuff. And how strings can do that thing when they're put against a vocal lyric, a vocal melody, where they can amplify the emotion that you feel. It's just so powerful. It's such a spell.
I mean, there's so many songs on the album where the swell of emotion that you get from the strings is really staggering and cinematic.
Yeah, that's right. And chamber as well, small and intimate, and it's got that's a good point. There's a lot of scale. I was listening to your podcast that you made, the really good one with Rosie Jones, and she was talking about that song and the numbers.
Yeah.
Me and my brother, when we were much younger, we got into these records called Soulful Strings, which are the sort of unison jazz sort of cocktail records that came out in America, I guess in, the 60s. You'd find them next to the Ramsey Lewis sections in a lot of record shops. And they're instrumental records of Paint It Black. So you'd have Soulful Strings do the music of the Rolling Stones or something. Yeah. So it's where the whole section basically is playing unison, and they're all playing the same melody. So that was kind of one of his inspirations for that record, for that song.
There's a song on the album called Identikit, which is one of my favourite songs.
Oh, nice.
On there. And,
thanks, man.
Which also, I think that's probably it's such a bass-driven song.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of a weird one, that song, because it's kind of really satisfying to play because the chord sequence is quite sort of straight. We were working on a record called King of Limbs, and we were working on loops and things, and talking about loops and talking about our love of Talking Heads, and there were these vocal loops that Tom had made, and that's where that came from, sort of, basically, I think.
Yeah, so I've read that.
Because he's just such an amazing, A, he's got an amazing voice, and B, he's got an amazing ability to make a beautiful melody. the songs, I think, will come out of these beautiful melodies that he can just, conjure up. And that song, Identity Kit, kind of, I think, came out of that experiment with loops of his voice and melodies.
At this point, after having worked together for so long, do you all fall into the same roles on each album, or do you find do you even have to communicate it a lot of the time? You all just kind of go in whatever direction you're feeling individually, or is there a conversation at the start of what you want to do with this album, what you want to do with this project?
That's a good thing I've been thinking about, which is like, how much time you talk about your love of music with your mates. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, I really like this, or you should check that out, or listen to this, and that still happens. I haven't still got too sort of bored and jaded. So, and I just think that when we were all kids, that's what we did a lot. And I think it would be great to do. My tummy was rumbling away, and I think that shared passion for listen to this, check this out. I think maybe you have to sort of maybe work a lot. Tom's very good at that because he's got his Spotify playlists and stuff like that. So, which is really great. So you can check in on what he's checking out. Because we were a bunch of kids from school where, we were inspired by all that sort of post-punk bands like Magazine and Joy Division, and it was about the sort of passion and enthusiasm and and curiosity.
How much also does where you all are as people, as individuals in your personal lives or in general, how much does that seep into each album, especially with this album? Is there anything that...
Well, I listened to what you said. Obviously, you were talking about A Moon-Shaped Pool with Rosie Jones on your podcast, and obviously I don't want to get into any of that specific stuff. Yeah, absolutely. But what I obviously wanted to comment on it was, I just say that I just think the general sort of thing about it is, as we all get older, random shit happens. It's entropy and stuff, bad things. As you get older, life happens to you, whether you like it or not. And life exists as a way of sort of mitigating, making things better, recovering from, learning from, and dealing with all that crap. Or I don't think whether it's crap, just dealing with the things, all the events, and that's just what happens. And I just think it's so enormous privilege to be able to have any kind of way to play music.
Yeah. I definitely am not trying to get any personal stories about the band onto the podcast. That thing of not commenting on that and you guys just releasing an album and letting the audience make what they want of it and make it their thing is such a nice kind of... Talking about it 5 years later as well, it kind of grows over time and it's what the audience make of it. And, there is speculation from people about maybe this is about this, maybe this is about that. But the silence on all of that means that it will always be what it means to each individual in a way.
Well, I think that's right. I think it respects the individual who's listening to the music, because they're all having their experiences. I mean, that's the power of the thing, is that you've got an audience made up of individuals who all they're there collectively, but they've all experienced it individually. Or if I'm mangling my language now, I'd say severally even. I know which word is grammatically correct. But it's like that thing, isn't it? It's like you're having a shared experience about something that's very private at the same time. And it's there's a song on A Moon-Shaped Pool called Deck's Dark. We started playing it and it was quite tricky, and we started playing it out live. And it does that thing, I think it's because it's mid-tempo, but it's quite sort of loud. It's almost a bit sort of 70s, sort of, I would say in a way, sort of slashy, glammy sort of thing in a weird way. And it's not really something we would do normally as a band, because it's sort of half speed in a weird way. But it's really, so it shows you something that you didn't do before. So I love that. I love being in a band where I don't know what this thing is that Tom will say come up with. And then it becomes this other thing, hopefully he didn't think of. And then it's sort of that you're surprised by something, by some kind of collective effort, which is what the point of it is all about.
So for someone like me who's now just getting into the band, would you say I should start from the beginning?
work through the albums that way?
Okay.
Or would you
Cool.
hop around, if I've started at the end, do I work backwards?
Okay. Where do you start?
Yeah.
Bluffer's Guide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Because it must be hard for you being in the band to think like that.
No, I don't think so.
What other people should listen to.
That's good. If it was, well, just obviously what you do, the thing is you say, what would I do?
Yes.
That's what you're asking me.
Yeah, sure.
I would say I'd start off with the B-sides from like Benz and OK Computer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So why would you start with those?
Because I really like them.
Yeah.
And they're good because they're sort of, a lot of those songs are songs that sort of didn't end up on records. But because they didn't end up on records, in some ways they sort of didn't get the same sort of scrutiny and treatment in a way. Or they were sort of finished and then they were put on a shelf. And then you go back to them and go, oh, I actually really like that. And there was a song on the Benz called, a beautiful song Tom had written called Black Star. And we actually, it was the first thing I think we recorded with Nigel Godrich, because we made the Benz with John Leckie. Stop me if I'm rambling. We made the record with this incredible producer called John Leckie, and he was mixing the other tracks on the Benz at the time at Abbey Road, and we had the day to ourselves, like the mice in Bagpuss or something, you know. And we worked with Nigel for the first time on the song Black Star. I think that's what happened, and it's such an incredible song. And that was sort of that we didn't know what was going to happen to that, and of course it's on the record. So that's an example of a song that perhaps benefited from not having that initial scrutiny like the other songs did. But that's not the B-side. But B-sides, yeah, like there's a song called How Can You Be Sure, which is a very nice ballad, and there's a song called Do Do Do. Oh God, I'll have to pause and think. Yeah, so start with the B-sides from those.
Do you think there's a bit of a sentimentality for you there as well with B-sides? Because I always find, like, as a comic, like my favourite jokes are often the ones that, like, not everyone in the room is going for, or the ones that I had to take out eventually, but like I kind of want to find a home for them later down the line, or something like that, and that you kind of like feel this more almost a personal relationship with, because the audience hasn't taken as much ownership of them, and it's more yours in a way.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always in awe about how comedians work out their material and like have to road test it and hone it and work it out, and because you can't really, it's not so much like music, you know, you get a pretty good idea what's going to fly or not before you're in front of an audience, whereas when you're doing what you do, you kind of need to have that acid test, don't you?
There's no practicing, so you practice in front of the crowd, and like I was in bands before I did comedy, and suddenly, with comedy, I was like, we were really spoiled being able to practice, and like I got so annoyed looking back. Every time we had a band practice and someone would suggest an idea, someone else would just say, no, I don't think that would work, and we wouldn't try it. And I'd get so frustrated looking back and going, why didn't we just, no one was in the room, we should have just tried everything. Yeah. And like, do you guys just try every idea that you come up with in practice, and like, if it's good, it's good, and if it's not, you know, it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I think so. I think you do that because, I think you do try. Well, the classic thing, what happens is you forget what you did before that worked.
Right, yeah.
That's the classic. It's crazy because you've done so many things. You forget the successes as well as the failures, which is really frustrating.
That must work though, because I think the songs on this album that are like, you know, stuff like True Love Waits, you've released it as a live version before. It's been around for a long time, but there's not a precious thing of it always has to be like this. This is how it's played. It's like,
no, but
it's for this album. It's different, and we want to do it in this way. And I think that opens you up to so much more possibilities and creativity, and gives someone something new each time, which is like, I think that's got to be quite rare that people like in a band are quite open to changing whatever they do to suit the moment, and can step outside of the song a little bit.
I think it's just as you get older, you become like more reconciled to your sort of uselessness and inabilities, and and care less about it at the same time. Yeah. So because the clock's ticking.
In your earlier days with the band, was that different?
Oh yeah, I mean you go around school and whatever, you'd be like wearing badges, like what if you like say New Order or something, or some people who actually like sort of Nawabum or something like that, you know. And it was very tribal, which it seems a lot different now. It's like because of Spotify, everything, people will listen to music, the kids will listen to like stuff, I don't know, whether it's doo-wop stuff from the 50s or whether it's grime or trime or, I don't know, trap or rap. Yeah. I sound like Bad Dad. I sound like I'm sort of pretending to sort of not know what I'm talking about, and it's probably half of it's true. Anyway, yeah, so it's just great, you know. It's like what's happened with streaming, isn't it? My 17-year-old son will play me like, I don't know, like Fleetwood Mac live and their reunion gig back in '83 when they got back together in LA. And then he'll play me stuff, the new Tyler record, whatever. We'll go and see. So that's great. Everything's up for grabs. Whereas when I was a kid, it was much more like, you know, that's the ditch you're going to die in. You know, it was much more, which is kind of a bit lame, really. Not less. No,
I don't know. It's quite cool. Like I was at my friend's house the other day, and she's got a teenage daughter, and I hadn't seen her daughter since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So when I had last seen her, I think she was not a teenager.
Yeah.
And now she's like suddenly got a whole new identity. She's got into a certain type of music.
Yeah.
She's really like goffed up now.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, when I was like a teenager, I remember getting into alternative music, and I didn't change how I looked because I felt like too self-conscious I almost felt like that would be silly to suddenly start dressing like a punk or dressing like a metalhead.
Yeah.
So I didn't do it, and then I became quite jealous. When I was around my friend's house and like, do you know what?
Yeah.
Good on her for throwing herself into it and really going for it and showing the world who she is. And this is what I like. And actually going, I'm a teenager, so I'm going to be a teenager now. And I think that is fun. Just like wearing the badges,
the forms and the styles.
Yeah, and making it your
but
identity.
I think that happens. I don't know. Maybe there is some kind of social media bullying crap. But when we were kids, it was like a lot of it was mediated by the music press. So you had Sounds Enemy and Melody Maker.
Yeah.
So you had a lot, you know, the flip of the passion and enthusiasm is then becomes a sort of prescription and division and the sort of this is good and this is bad, you know, and it used to be quite stressful, I think, all of that stuff. But I think you're right. I think, you know, I envied and admired people who could just not care about caring passionately about it, as in they felt comfortable with becoming the goth, doing the punk thing, playing with those things and didn't care what other people thought, but at the same time they were serious about what they were doing, and I think that's brilliant.
So, Colin, before we go...
Yes, James.
I was going to ask you a question that I ask all guests on the podcast. Well, normally I say based on this album alone, but it's your own album. So, just will you admit that 2016 was the greatest year of music of all time before we go?
Of all time?
Of all time.
Well,
or what is for you the greatest year?
For me, 2016 is because I thought about this before you came here, I'm filled with the sort of fear of all the great music that I missed in 2016.
Yeah.
You know, because my friend Kieran, who's Fortet, you know, he's brilliant. He said to me once, you know, he thinks that basically everyone now should be banned from making new music. There should be some kind of like memory bomb that's exploded over the planet, so that everyone forgets how to like play or make or write anything, and we just live with what we've got. Because there's more than enough. And I feel that about 2016. There's probably enough. Because I guess that's an optimistic thing to say. There must be a bunch of brilliant stuff that was made in 2016 that I haven't heard and I probably will never hear. And that fills me with a sort of vertiginous feeling of sort of sadness and glee. Yeah.
Well, there was a big element of that when I started doing it. I just realised, you know, you really do realise how, especially now, the music industry is so saturated. There's so much stuff. People can release stuff online on their own. And you do just go there. I just won't hear so many albums every single year. There's going to be so much stuff that passes me by, and it's quite nice to just go all in on one year and go, well, I'll do a really thorough deep dive on this, so at least I haven't missed anything in that year. And
I used to work at Our Price Records.
Oh, lovely. I used to love it so much.
And they'd have the chart list. You'd have the charts, and then you'd have the Our Price target marketed ones, right? 25. So these are the records you're going to be buying on the Saturday, you know.
Yeah.
I quite like that. I like the curation, you know, and I miss the curation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to. There was an R Price and an HMV in Kettering, and I would shop in both of them because they had different stuff.
Yes.
But like, there was something about the R price
Yes.
that just felt a lot more. I felt a lot more at home
that's
there.
great.
I don't know what it was. I think it's because I bought my first ever single there. I bought E17 Thunder there, and so
Fantastic.
like it was like a bit of a. That was my first ever buying a cassette experience.
Yeah.
So like I never got that in HMV.
No, you never get that same customer service.
No. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Colin.
Thanks,
It's been
James.
so great to speak to you, and good luck with your adventures into double bass, and who knows what you're going to discover.
Yeah, I think it'll be like a slow Tuesday afternoon when they're doing the salad bar promotion at the local pizza restaurant. Then I'll be there probably. I don't know, something like that.
Well,
No.
I would love to hear Colin Greenwood's solo double bass album.
Yeah, well, when you want people to leave at the end of your gig, then I could come on and do it.
I don't know if getting Colin Greenwood to come on and play
That
double bass
sounds
would get
terrible.
rid of everyone. I
Sounds
think a lot
terrible.
of people would stick around.
Well, we've got this sort of joke tribute act, when Radiohead finishes Colin's Radiohead experience with Ed and Phil, so it spells creep. And it'll basically just be me with a bunch of bored, it'll be like Foregone Conclusion, is that right?
Yeah, the Ricky
with a bunch of
Gervais,
really bored 20-something session players, and I'm playing creep 10 times, exhorting the 5 people in the audience. 4 who wandered in by mistake.
Yeah.
Come on, if you know this. My brother's promised to drive past on the first night to support me. He said he'll drive past the pub.
Well, sign me
So-
up. Let me know when that's happening.
Can I just plug that actually
Yeah,
on your?
absolutely. You
It's
can
Creep, Colin's Radiohead experience. So I know it says with Ed and Phil, but actually they won't be there. And I'm currently in some sort of protracted legal negotiation with both of their lawyers about whether I can use Ed and Phil.
Get a different Ed and a different
Well,
Phil.
it could be a
Doesn't even
different Ed
have
and
to be
Phil,
them.
but they could be like the another guitarist and drummer who are called Ed and Phil.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant idea.
Phil Collins?
That's going to save me a fortune. No,
Phil
you've
Collins on
already
drums.
gone
Yeah.
into the celebrity thing there again.
Yeah.
But that could save me a
pretty hard.
fortune. Oh, thanks, James.
No worries. I'm always here to help.
Brilliant.